The woman behind the counter had been smiling for 6 hours straight. Not the warm kind, the kind you paste on because the alternative is crying in a Tim Hortons parking lot before your shift. Solène Marchand had been a registered nurse for 8 years. She knew how to read a room, how to read a chart, how to read the particular silence of a patient who wasn't telling her everything. What she hadn't learned, not yet, was how to read the specific cruelty of a Tuesday afternoon at Pemberton Square Mall in Ottawa when the wrong person decided she was an easy target. It started, as most humiliations do, with something small. She'd been off shift for 40 minutes, still in her scrubs, the pale blue ones from the ICU at Queensway Carleton, the ones with the small bleach spot near the left pocket that she kept meaning to throw out and never did. She'd meant to change, but her locker had been sticking again, and she was already running late to pick up her nephew from her sister's place across town. And honestly, she was so tired that the idea of one more task felt like lifting something very heavy in the dark. So she'd walked into the mall in her scrubs, with her lanyard tucked under her collar and her hair half escaped from its bun, and she'd headed straight for the pharmacy at the end of the main corridor. She needed to pick up her mother's blood pressure medication, a simple errand. 10 minutes, maybe 15. She never made it to the pharmacy. The first thing she noticed was a woman, immaculate in a cream blazer, the kind that costs more than Solène's last car payment, standing very still in the middle of the corridor near the upscale boutique called Aurelie & Co. The woman was staring at her phone, and then she looked up, and her eyes found Solène, and something shifted in her expression. Not alarm exactly. More like the particular disdain of someone who has decided, in a single glance, exactly who you are and exactly how much space you deserve to take up. Solène didn't think anything of it. She walked past. Then the woman's voice, crisp and carrying, "Excuse me, you can't be in here dressed like that." Solène stopped. She turned around slowly. "I'm sorry?" The woman, her name tag, Solène would later notice, read Cassandra Delorme, store manager, looked her up and down. "This is a premium retail environment. We have a dress standard for a reason. You're making other customers uncomfortable." Solène blinked. "I'm not shopping here. I'm walking through the mall. The mall has certain expectations as well." Cassandra Delorme took a single step forward, and her voice dropped in a way that somehow made it carry further. "I've had complaints about me, about people in workwear loitering. It affects the atmosphere." Solène was aware, in the way you become suddenly aware of your own body in a doctor's office, that 3 or 4 people had slowed to watch. A teenager near a kiosk, a man in a suit holding a coffee, a couple who had paused outside Aurelie & Co.'s window display and were now facing inward. "I'm not loitering," Solène said. "I'm walking to the pharmacy. There's a side entrance for service personnel." The words landed flat and specific, and Solène felt them somewhere behind her sternum. Service personnel. As though she were a delivery driver, as though the distinction were obvious and appropriate and not, in fact, a precise little knife. "I'm a nurse," she said quietly. Cassandra Delorme's expression didn't change. "I'm sure you are. But this isn't a hospital, and the way you're dressed is, I just finished a 12-hour shift in the ICU." Solène kept her voice even. She'd learned that in nursing school, actually, a professor named Gendron had told them in second year that the most important thing they'd ever learn was how to stay calm when everything around them was not. "I'm picking up my mother's medication. That's all. Then you can come back when you're dressed appropriately." Someone nearby made a sound that might have been a laugh. Solène didn't look to see who. She stood there for a moment, and she felt everything she didn't have the energy to say stack up inside her like a column of patient charts. The sleeplessness, the weight of the last 12 hours, the woman in bed 7 who'd coded at 6 a.m., and the family Solène had sat with in the hallway after, and the coffee she'd never finished, and the way her feet felt inside these shoes, and her mother's medication waiting at a counter 40 meters away. She felt all of it. And she looked at Cassandra Delorme's perfectly arranged face, and she said nothing. She turned to leave. "Smart choice," Cassandra Delorme said, behind her. Solène didn't know why that was the thing that stopped her. Maybe it was the satisfaction in it, the certainty, the absolute confidence of someone who had never been wrong about anything and never expected to start. She turned back around. "My mother," she said, "had a stroke 4 months ago. She lives 20 minutes from here, she can't drive, and her refill was due yesterday." I drove 45 minutes after a 12-hour shift in the ICU to pick it up for her because she's alone on Tuesdays and I'm the only one who—" She stopped. She hadn't meant to say any of that. Never mind. Cassandra Delorme looked at her with the particular patience of someone who has decided the conversation is already over. I understand. But policy is policy. Which policy? A new voice from somewhere behind Solène. Specifically, she turned. There were two of them. A man and not a dog, or not only a dog, because the animal sitting very precisely at the man's left heel was a Belgian Malinois, and it was wearing a vest, and it was watching Cassandra Delorme with the calm, dispassionate attention of something that has been trained to assess threats. The man was maybe 40, broad through the shoulders, wearing civilian clothes, dark jeans, a canvas jacket, but standing in the particular way that some men stand, the way that has less to do with posture and more to do with the body's memory of where it learned to be still. He had a small scar along his jaw, barely visible. His eyes were gray and entirely unimpressed. "Which policy?" he said again, looking at Cassandra Delorme. "The one about dress code or the one about service personnel entrances? Because I've been in this mall for 20 minutes and I haven't seen either of those posted anywhere." Cassandra Delorme blinked. "Sir, this is a private matter." She said that out loud, the man said. "The part about the service entrance?" That part she said in front of about 12 people, so it's not particularly private anymore. He walked forward. The Malinois moved with him, fluid and quiet, and people around them shifted without quite knowing why, the way crowds always shift when something purposeful moves through them. He stopped beside Solène, not in front of her, beside her. It was a specific choice and she registered it. "You're a nurse?" he said to her, not with pity, just confirming. "Yes, us." He nodded once and looked back at Cassandra Delorme. "Her name's on her lanyard," he said pleasantly, "and there's a hospital ID on her badge. So whatever policy you're citing, I'd think carefully about whether you want to be the person who documented turning away a nurse after a 12-hour ICU shift because she was wearing scrubs." "I don't think this concerns you," Cassandra Delorme said. Her voice had changed slightly. Not much, but enough. "Probably not," the man agreed, "but I was standing right there when you told her to use the service entrance, and I've got a pretty good memory." He paused. "So does he." He looked down at the Malinois, who was still watching Cassandra Delorme with that quiet, evaluating attention. "He's trained in search and rescue. He's also trained to read tension in a space. He's reading a lot of it right now, and I want you to know that I think his read is accurate." There was a silence. Not the comfortable kind. "I'm going to the pharmacy now," Solène said. Nobody stopped her. She was standing at the pharmacy counter when she heard footsteps behind her and turned to find him there again. The man and the dog, waiting a respectful distance back. The pharmacist, a young woman named according to her badge as Theodore, which Solène always found charming, was pulling her mother's medication from the shelf. "You don't have to follow me," Solène said. "I'm not following you," he said. "I'm picking up a prescription." He held up a small paper bag. "Already got it, actually. I was going to the food court." She looked at him. "I'm Callum," he said, and then seemed to remember something. Whitmore. Callum Whitmore. Solène Marchand." He nodded. The dog sat down and yawned. "What's his name?" she asked. Dex. She looked at the dog, who looked back at her with the kind of self-cession that made you feel you were the one being evaluated. "What kind of search and rescue?" "Avalanche. Mountain. We're with the Ottawa Valley Unit. Volunteer side." He glanced at her mother's medication now being slid into a bag. "She okay?" "Your mom?" "She's getting better. It takes time." "Yeah." He said it like someone who knew what that kind of time cost. She paid for the prescription. He didn't make a production of waiting, just stood there in the way he had, with Dex at his heel, and when she turned to go, they ended up walking in the same direction. "You know you didn't have to do that," she said. "Back there, I know. You could have just walked past, could have." He held the door for her as they reached the mall entrance, and the cold March air came in hard off the parking lot. Didn't want to. She stopped on the mat just inside the doors. Why? He thought about it. Not the performative way, the way people think when they want you to notice them thinking. Actually thought about it. Eyes somewhere in the middle distance, Dex watching the automatic doors open and close. "My mother was a home care worker," he said, "for 18 years. She drove her own car, paid for her own gas, wore a uniform, and people looked through her, all the time, like she wasn't quite real. He looked at Solène. I've never been able to watch that happen and keep walking. Solène held her mother's medication in her hands and stood there in the foyer of a mall in Ottawa, 6 hours into her post-shift crash, and felt something in her chest that she hadn't expected to feel today. It wasn't gratitude exactly. She wasn't sure she had the vocabulary for it yet. It was something more specific, something about being seen accurately by a stranger who hadn't needed to stop and had stopped anyway. Thank you, she said, genuinely. Take care of your mom, he said, and get some sleep. She laughed, and it surprised her, the realness of it. She drove to her mother's place in Canada with the heat on high and the radio off, and she thought about 12-hour shifts and the particular weight of being talked down to by someone who would never know what you actually knew, and she thought about a man with a Belgian Malinois and his mother, who had driven her own car and paid for her own gas and been looked through. Her mother was at the kitchen table when she arrived, doing the word puzzle she always did on Tuesdays, and she looked up when Solène came in and said, "You look tired." "I am tired," Solène said. "Sit down, then." Her mother was already pushing back from the table. "I'll make tea. You're the one who needs looking after, Solène." Her mother said her name the way mothers say names when they're not interested in your argument. "Sit." She sat. Her mother put the kettle on, and Solène set the medication on the table between the word puzzle and the salt shaker. And outside the kitchen window, the light was doing that particular thing it does in Ottawa in March, pale and reluctant, stretched thin over the last of the snow. She thought, 12 hours, one errand. One woman who thought she knew exactly who I was. She thought one man who disagreed. Her mother brought the tea and sat down across from her and looked at her with the careful attention that Solène had inherited, she thought, or learned, the look of someone who has spent a long time learning to read what people weren't saying. "Something happened," her mother said. "Something small," Solène said. "Tell me." So she did. She told her about Cassandra Delorme and the cream blazer and the service entrance and the 12 people watching. She told her about the man called Whitmore and the dog called Dex. She told her about standing in the pharmacy and the cold air from the doors and what he'd said about his mother. Her mother listened the way she'd always listened, without commentary, without interjection, just the full and complete attention that some people never learn how to give. When Solène finished, her mother wrapped both hands around her mug and said, "His mother was a home care worker, 18 years. Her mother nodded slowly. "People look through them," she said. "I know. He knew too, yes." Her mother was quiet for a moment. "That's the thing about being underestimated," she said. "The people who understand it, they always know. And the people who do it," she looked at the medication on the table, "they almost never do." Solène drove home at 6:45. She was too tired to make dinner, so she ate crackers and peanut butter standing at the kitchen counter, which felt appropriately unromantic for a Tuesday. She showered. She sat on the edge of her bed in her towel and looked at the wall for longer than was probably normal. She thought about what it costs to stay calm. The professor in second year had made it sound like discipline, like a skill you built like muscle, and she supposed it was. But the other thing, the thing Gendron hadn't said, was that the effort of it goes somewhere. You don't use up that energy and have it just disappear. It stays in you like a note held too long. She'd held it today. In the corridor of Pemberton Square Mall, with 12 people watching and her feet hurting and her mother's medication a corridor away, she had held it, and she had not cried, and she had not raised her voice, and she had not said the 3 or 4 things that had lined themselves up very efficiently behind her teeth. She was proud of herself for that. She was also aware that she was going to be back at Queensway Carleton in 14 hours, that there would be new patients in the ICU, that bed 7 would have someone else in it, that the work was perpetual in the way only certain kinds of work are, and that tomorrow morning she was going to get up and drive to that hospital in those scrubs, and she was not going to use any side entrance, not anywhere, not ever. She got into bed. She slept. The following Thursday, she was back at the pharmacy, this time in jeans and a jacket, which she acknowledged privately was a choice made with more awareness than she usually gave to getting dressed. She was picking up her own prescription this time. Something minor. She was not thinking about the previous Tuesday. She was thinking about it a little. The pharmacy was quiet. The pharmacist was the same one, Theodore, badge and all, and they exchanged the small politenesses that made these transactions human. Solène was putting her card away when she heard the automatic doors and the click of nails on tile and looked up. Whitmore and Dex. He saw her at approximately the same moment and seemed mildly surprised, then not. "Nurse Marchand," he said. "Just Solène," she said. "How's the prescription?" "Finished. This is something else." He held up the kind of bag that holds dog food and joint supplements, which she found humanizing. "His hips," he explained, looking down at Dex. "He's 7. Getting distinguished." Dex looked up at the word distinguished with what Solène could only describe as dignity. "I wanted to ask you something," she said, and then wasn't sure she had. But he was looking at her now with that same quality of attention, the real kind, the kind that waits, and she went ahead. "What you said about your mother, the home care thing. Is she still working?" Something moved in his expression, brief and personal. "She passed away," he said, 2 years ago. "Heart failure. I'm sorry. She was a nurse for the first part of her career," he said, before she switched to home care. 17 years in the ER. Solène was quiet for a moment. "So you grew up around it. Grew up around people who came home exhausted," he said, "and still went back." He shifted the bag of dog supplements. "I have a lot of respect for that. I know it's not a thing that means much coming from a stranger in a mall." "It means more than you'd think," she said. They stood there in the pharmacy, in the ordinary bright light of it, with Dex sitting between them like a very composed chaperone, and Solène thought about what it means to be seen. Not celebrated, not thanked specifically, not the subject of any particular gesture. Just seen, accurately, by someone paying attention. "There's a coffee place near the food court," she said. "If you wanted. I have about 40 minutes before I need to be anywhere." He considered this with the seriousness she was beginning to recognize as characteristic. "Yeah," he said, "that works." They walked together through the corridor of the mall, the same corridor, past the front of Aurélie & Co., where Cassandra Delorme was visible through the glass, reorganizing a display of silk scarves with the focused intensity of someone who has decided the afternoon's priorities very clearly. She didn't look up. Dex walked between them, unhurried, his vest marking him as working even when he wasn't, the kind of visible credential that announced itself without requiring anyone to say a word. Solène thought briefly about credentials, about lanyards tucked under collars and hospital IDs on badges, and the kind of proof you should never have to offer in a mall corridor. Then she let it go. The coffee was decent. The conversation was the kind that happens when two people who aren't in the habit of talking about themselves both, for one reason or another, make an exception. He told her about search and rescue, the training, the hours, the particular geography of the valley. She told him about the ICU and the night shifts and the way a hospital sounds at 4 a.m. when the overhead lights are dimmed, and everything is very quiet and very serious. Dex slept under the table with his chin on Callum Whitmore's boot, which Solène found unexpectedly moving. At 25 minutes in, a small child at the next table reached toward Dex with that absolute toddler confidence of someone who has not yet learned that not everything wants to be grabbed, and Whitmore said, very gently, "He's working, bud." And the child considered this and withdrew, and the mother looked relieved, and Dex didn't move. "Does he know he's off duty right now?" Solène asked. "He knows I'm here," Whitmore said. "That's about all the off-duty he does." She finished her coffee. He finished his. Outside the window of the cafe, the mall moved in its usual way, the general purposeful drift of people going somewhere, coming from somewhere, navigating the ordinary distances between where they were and where they needed to be. "Same time next week?" he said as they stood to leave. "I'm usually back for Dex's supplements on Thursdays." She looked at him. "I might be working Thursday," she said. "Friday, then." "I can do Friday." She drove back to her apartment with the windows down, even though it was cold, because she liked the way the air came in and made everything feel cleared out, washed through, the day rearranged slightly into something more manageable. She thought about a woman in a cream blazer who had looked at her and decided, in one glance, that she knew everything she needed to know. She thought about a man who had looked at her and decided the same glance wasn't enough. She thought about what it means to underestimate someone, the confidence of it, the certainty, the way it closes off every possible outcome except the one you've already decided. And she thought about what it means to be wrong. Not the terrible kind of wrong, not the catastrophic kind, just the ordinary kind, The kind that lives in a single Tuesday afternoon in a mall in Ottawa when you look at a woman in scrubs and see a problem to be managed instead of a person to be met. That kind of wrong, which is the most common kind and the most preventable, and the one most people never think about. Her mother called as she was parking. "How was your day?" her mother asked. "Good," Solène said, and then, "Actually good. Tell me." "I will," she said. "Over the phone I'll tell you. Give me a second to get inside." She got out of the car. The March air was still cold, still that particular Ottawa cold that never quite commits to leaving until it's ready, and the last light was doing its pale thing over the parking lot and the rooftops and the gray distance of the city. She took a breath of it. She went inside.